Recording going. All right. So just to review what we've been discussing, right? We've been looking at these statistical generalizations. So in your group activity for today, I'm going to ask you to look at 3 different instances of a generalization and evaluate them. And there's also a couple other questions too, but the big ones are, the first 3 are, here's an inductive generalization, evaluate if the inductive generalization is successful or unsuccessful. There's only one thing that matters if you're determining if there's a good or bad inductive generalization, and that's, is the sample group representative of the overall population? If the sample is indeed representative, you've got a good inductive generalization. If not, it's a bad inductive generalization. It's sort of that simple. There's a couple sort of individual factors that go into this. So sample size, right? The sample group has to be large enough that it can represent the overall population, right? So it's sort of another way of thinking about the hasty generalization fallacy. One of the questions I'm going to ask you to do is to sort of diagnose in a more precise way what's wrong with an argument that's committing the hasty generalization fallacy. You should be doing this in terms of representation. How representative is the sample group? This one should be, for the most part, of less importance in your evaluation, just because figuring out how large the sample group really needs to be requires math. You have to do math to determine it, and we're not doing math in this class. So don't make a huge deal of this one. If you see something egregious, if like 3 people are supposed to represent the entire nation, sure, that's a problem with sample group. What you should mainly focus on is the second criteria, right? The diversity that's present in the sample group has to reflect the same diversity that's present in the population. Sorry, I repeat the same word twice. All right. So the sample group must do a good job of having, for example, this relevant sort of demographic data. If it's an opinion poll about Americans, it has to reflect the demographic diversity that's present within the American population writ large. If you fail to do this, if you don't design your sort of sample group properly, what you'll end up with is the fallacy of biased statistics. This is where there's because of how you're sort of selecting people to sample, there's going to be a systematic bias present within the sampling method. And again, this doesn't have to be, you don't necessarily have to know this, so the person making the survey might not know this or recognize the mistake that they've made, but the result of the mistake will be that only some parts of the population, only some demographics are going to be present within the sample group, and so the sample group will give us a sort of a skewed view of what the overall population looks like. And the best way of avoiding this is to use either true randomness or stratified randomness. That's sort of the best practice. That's the way that we can sort of try to avoid the fallacy of biased statistics as best as we can. It's not always possible. It's really expensive to even do a stratified random survey. It takes a lot of time. You need a really high response rate, and people don't like responding to things like opinion polls and whatnot. So with your evaluation, remember these are inductive arguments. We can still be talking about stronger, weaker, right? So some sampling methods might well not be perfect. They still might not do an equally good job of representing everyone, but they might be a lot better than some that do a worse job at it. So you have there be gradations in your sort of evaluation of these arguments: stronger, weaker, fallacy of bias statistics, that's really weak. Right? One that just fails in its entirety. Last point, we got the idea of a sampling error. So even if you do a really good job designing your sample group, there's still the risk of sampling error. There's still a chance that you could have just gotten unlucky, and through the randomness that you sort of employed to draw from the general population, you just happen to get unlucky and disproportionately represent certain groups rather than other groups. The way this possibility gets corrected for is with the idea of a margin of error, sort of a wiggle room that you build into your result. The larger you make the margin of error, the more likely it will be that the conclusion is true, the more you have more wiggle room, but the conclusion is simultaneously less weaker. It's sort of like a weaker claim, but a stronger argument. Weaker claim because the conclusion will be less precise because you give yourself all this wiggle room, but a stronger argument because the conclusion will be more likely to be true. So that's a review of what we were talking about the past couple days. Does anyone have any questions or anything they'd like to go over before I break you up into groups? All right, then let me add the last. All right, I think everyone should be back now. Excellent. All right. So we'll go over this activity once the asynchronous students turn in. So we'll go over it on Friday, make sure everyone's on the right page with it. Go over any questions people had on it as well, any sort of further issues people had. We don't have much time left. We have about 5 minutes left. So I'll maybe just vaguely introduce what we're going to talk about in chapter 11. We're not going to go into any sort of great detail with it, but we'll do at least an introduction. Or maybe nothing else, just a refresher. So, okay, what are you actually all doing in this class? Maybe I should just, before I even start writing things on the board, let's actually just maybe even just start there. What have you actually been doing this whole semester? This weird semester, so let's specify it. What have we been doing in this class together over the last what, 3 months, 4 months? What have we actually been doing? Why are we taking this class? What's the point of it? Our goal here is what we called in the very first day of class, we call this the inquiry, is to talk about inquiry. Right? Inquiry is this sort of process by which we sort of rationally investigate the world in order to discover what is true and what is false about the world. And we don't inquire about everything, right? If I'm having a barroom discussion about who the best quarterback of all time is with a friend while we're drinking, we're probably not engaged in a serious inquiry. We're probably there just sort of chatting or shooting the shit or having fight. We're not necessarily engaged in this sort of process of inquiry. So there are times, however, when our beliefs are important, that we want to believe in, that our beliefs are sort of rationally formed. So what do I mean by rational here? All I mean by this is the quite simple, my belief was formed on the basis of evidence. Reasons, right? That's where the word reason comes from. It comes from giving reasons for why things are true. So a rational belief is something that I believe because of evidence and reasons, right? Arguments. Right? In that special logic sense of argument that we've been working on throughout the semester. That's why we continually talk again and again and again, how likely is it that the conclusion is true? Right? Because that's sort of the goal of inquiry. Our goal is to come to a true conclusion, right? To reach correct determinations about how the world really works. Right. Now, obviously, more than just reasons and evidence go into determining our beliefs. We believe all kinds of things, and frequently it's not even clear why we believe stuff that we believe. Right? Is what makes it. We did an exercise, I think it was the second day of class, where I actually asked you to explain to me why you believed some of the things that you believed. And you actually sort of, many of you were sort of like disturbed at the end of it of how little ability you actually had to sort of justify or explain where a lot of your beliefs come from. And indeed, our beliefs come from all over the place for all kinds of reasons, many of which are not, quote unquote, rational. Right? This is not a problem. This is not a bad thing. But these other sources for our beliefs can get in the way of inquiry if we're not careful. All right. So let's even pause for a second here before we do, and this was just where we sort of end for the day on. But let's engage in a couple minutes of real talk for a second. So basically, the only thing that everyone seems to agree on within this country is that no one is capable of talking successfully within this country. That seems to be the only thing Americans agree on, is that Americans can't agree on anything. Right? This is a collapse and a breakdown of inquiry. Right? That's the problem here. Right? We have a whole bunch of people, including us. Right? Like, so whenever I'm talking about people, I'm not talking about not me. Right? Me too. All of us have formulated our beliefs in all kinds of different ways for all kinds of different reasons. And we all think we're being rational, The problem is that frequently we're not. Right? Frequently our beliefs were formed on the basis of bad reasons, right? Or they were formed on the basis of things that have nothing to do with reason, of reason or evidence at all. Right? I believe some things literally because, I don't know, my dad told me dragonflies sew my lip shut when I was 5, and then dragonflies freaked me out, right? I mean, that's not really a particularly good reason to believe something, right? That is, these other sources of beliefs, they're not bad, but they can make it really hard to actually talk to other people. And what I want to actually end the semester talking about is, in a bigger picture sense, right? We've been developing these logical tools, what makes good arguments, what makes bad arguments. That's really, really important, but it's not enough. Just making a good argument is not enough to ensure that inquiry is occurring correctly, either that other people are going to listen to your good argument, or indeed even that you yourself are engaging in inquiry properly, even though if your argument is good. So there are other things at play, psychological factors, cognitive factors, social factors, that are at play in actually being able to inquire successfully, that are involved in critical thinking, that are involved in being a logical, rational agent. Those are what I wanted us to talk about for the remainder of the semester. So what we'll do on Friday, we're going to start talking about what are called usually psychological biases, basically biases that are results of certain affective states that we have. We're also going to talk about sort of social biases, how certain group dynamics can hinder inquiry, and then also cognitive biases, how the ways that we process information can actually hinder and interfere with inquiry. That's how I sort of want to end, and I want to sort of have this emphasis of how can we actually sort of talk to one another better? Because we've all had experiences of trying to talk to other people and it ending horribly. So how can we do it better? That's sort of what we're going to end with. All right. We are at the end of class for the day, so thank you all very much. On Friday, we'll go over that group activity. I have a homework and a quiz for you as well on inductive generalizations, and we're going to spend the rest of the semester just talking about Chapter 11 and doing some exam review. So that's the plan from here on out. Thank you all very much. See you on Friday.